reading that I want to read is a poem, not a shortish poem by Robert Frost called "The Tuft of Flowers." I do want to set it up just a little, the because I think it's more effective if you know what's going on in the poem. The speaker in the poem, he begins the poem by saying, "I went to turn the grass once after one who mowed it in the dew before the sun." He's talking about the old-fashioned way of gathering hay, of cutting hay and making hay before balers and tractors with a hand scythe, the great big long-handled, long-bladed tool that you see. Father Time is often pictured with a scythe, so you've seen the scythe, I think. And when you cut the grass, grass is strangely, I know this, by the way, because my father had a part-time job mowing grass with a hand scythe when I was a boy. And the grass is surprisingly hard to cut and dulls the blade easily. And so when the dew is on the grass, it cuts better. So you cut it in the morning, then it lies there for a few hours, and then somebody else has to come and turn it over so the other side can dry. So that's the task that he's talking about in this poem. The Tuft of Flowers. I went to turn the grass once after one who mowed it in the dew before the sun. The dew was gone that made his blade so keen before I came to view the leveled scene. I looked for him behind an aisle of trees. I listened for his whetstone on the breeze. But he had gone his way, the grass all mown, and I must be as he had been, alone. As all must be, I said within my heart, whether they work together or apart. But as I said it, swift there passed me by on noiseless wing a bewildered butterfly, seeking with memories grown dim or night some resting flower of yesterday's delight. And once I marked his flight go round and round, as where some flower lay withering on the ground. And then he flew as far as I could see, and then on tremulous wing came back to me. I thought of questions that have no reply, and would have turned to the grass to dry, but he turned first and led my eye to look at a tall tuft of flowers beside a brook, a leaping tongue of bloom the scythe had spared, beside a reedy brook the scythe had bared. The mower in the dew had loved them thus, by leaving them to flourish, not for us, nor yet to draw one thought of ours to him, but from sheer morning gladness at the brim. The butterfly and I had lit upon, nevertheless, a message from the dawn that made me hear the wakening birds around, and hear his long scythe whispering to the ground, and feel a spirit kindred to my own, so that henceforth I worked no more alone, but glad with him I worked as with his aid, and weary sought at noon with him the shade, and dreaming as it were, held brotherly speech with one whose thoughts I had not hoped to reach. Men work together, I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. And I thought that was, that we're together, whether we're together or apart, is really quite wonderful in terms of the social isolation that we're all putting up with. Men work together, I told him from the heart, whether they work together or apart. Okay. All right. This sermon that I'm going to read is written by Marilyn Sewell, and she was the minister. She is the minister emerita of the First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon, where she served for 17 years before her retirement in 2009. And the title of the sermon is Reimagining the American Dream. And with your indulgence, I want to say something very briefly. Early on, and she comes back to it, she talks about the speech that Governor Winthrop gave on the deck of the first boat after the Mayflower, the Arbella, in 1630, the famous speech, the City on the Hill speech. Just before they landed in what is now Boston Harbor. And it's nothing that I can claim credit for, but I just can't help but love the idea and want to share it with you, that my ancestor, the great, etc., direct ancestor, Isaac Gross, was the brewmaster on that boat and was sitting there listening to the sermon, presumably, that Governor Winthrop gave. So here it is, Reimagining the American Dream. The early settlers who risked life and limb to come to this land, a land strange and unknown but full of promise, these early settlers had a dream. That dream included freedom to worship as they wished. It included the opportunity to prosper if they were willing to work hard. It included the possibility of owning their own land, plowing their own field, not being the landless servant or serf they would have been in the old country, where class systems were rigidly enforced and your life was absolutely locked into place by your rank and by your birth order. Although this dream promised much to the individual, it was also a dream grounded in holy covenant with God and with one another. Hear the words of Governor Winthrop, given even before his people disembarked from their ship to set foot in this promised land. He said, "We are entered into covenant with this work. We have taken out a commission." And he continues a bit later, "We must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities." And then he moves to the responsibility of this new settlement to the larger world. "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." A statement of manifest destiny. We shall be shining example to the rest of the world, a moral light that will guide others into ways of mercy and justice. The date was 1630. This was an amazing dream, the political piece of which was further articulated and refined in a document which came some 140 years later, a document which made a hitherto unimaginable claim. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. All people have precisely the same rights. Unheard of. This was the American dream. Granted, all people did not fall under the purview of the dream at the time. Women did not. Slaves did not. Men who did not own property did not. Native Americans did not exactly get a fair shake. But the ideal remained, and through the centuries we have worked to enlarge the scope of that dream. We have had some successes of which we are rightly proud, but the essence of that dream has been shaken and changed. What has happened to the sacred covenant of ourselves with our God and ourselves with one another? What has happened to that noble experiment, to the country that was to be a city upon a hill, leading other nations to righteousness and to justice? We are a nation where freedom has now been interpreted to mean that the strong don't have to care for the weak. We are a nation that stinks from corruption at the top, a nation which dresses itself in God language while pandering unashamedly to the rich and ignoring the poor. We are a nation hated and reviled by many other nations, and grudgingly tolerated by those who would count us as friends. We are far from that city upon a hill, that moral compass for other nations. Rather, we have decided to build empire, that a few might flourish at the expense of the many. Now, with our economy in shambles, with greed and corruption so apparent to all, we have finally awakened to the hard truth that easy money helped us avoid for so long. The economic system that we thought was sound, that could always be fixed, turned out to be a house of cards, a chimera based on false premises and inflated profit sheets. The good news is that we've come to a point of reckoning. We have had forced upon us a time of reflection that carries with it the possibility of radical change. I say radical change because radical means at the root, and no amount of shifting or tweaking will do what there is no solid core. Our problems turn out to be rooted not so much in economic malfeasance as in spiritual decadence. We have come to understand that the story we've been living by, the cultural narrative, is defunct. I refer to the cultural story of the nation, ostensibly about bringing freedom and democracy to all the world, while in truth about building empire. But I'm also referring to the cultural story for the individual, that which defines middle-class goals and aspirations. It's all about competition and getting mine. It goes something like this. You work on your resume, starting about age 2 or 3, get into a good elementary school, get into a good high school, get into a good university where you will make the right connections, graduate, get a good job, or a series of them, get married, buy a nice house, have 2.3 children, work hard and consume a lot, i.e. buy a lot of toys, get old and die. This is not a dream worthy of our lives. This will not render a life that will model anything worthy for our children. The emptiness of it will become apparent as these young people reach out for meaning in a society in which the parents serve as an economic system that no longer serves them, a system no longer grounded in communal and spiritual values. There's no bailing out a system that is ungrounded in relationship, bereft of moral principles. We have to build from the bottom up on new ground, new premises. Economics, as I see it, is fundamentally a moral discipline. Economics defines our material relationships with one another, that is, who gets what of the resources of a society. And economics defines our relationship with the natural environment. What are we exacting or extracting from Mother Earth, and for what purposes? When we tell our children, starting in their very first year, we say, now, Johnny, you have to learn to share. That's economics. Or we say to our 2-year-old, let's recycle that juice box. That's economics. The problem with economics, as it is treated academically and in the business world, is that ethical and moral issues are often left out of the conversation. After all, economics is a science, they tell us. Was it John Kenneth Galbraith who said that if you put all the economists in the world end to end, that would be a good thing? We use formulas, we measure, we predict, and moral issues cannot easily be figured into the equation. Maybe not, but we should consider that the most important things in this world are the things that do not yield easily to the scientific method. The movement of socialist and communist systems toward free markets is correct. They need feedback because complex systems cannot function well without various dependable feedback loops. But a major error of neoclassical economics is its over-reliance on only one form of feedback. It looks at prices and markets and little else. Social and environmental costs are excluded, but unemployment and underemployment are feedback. Global warming is feedback. An economy sized up by fear, that's feedback too. Economists have taught us to reify the economy or make it a system like a system of rules and regulations that are real and tangible, a system delivered from on high, a system that just is like air or water and is not amenable to change. But the system has been imagined by human beings on assumptions made by human beings, and it can be changed by human beings. So let's take a look at the values that run the country's economy and our lives at the moment. I think we'd have to use words like profit, production, efficiency, consumption, creation of capital. Now let me make myself clear. There's nothing wrong with these words. It's just that they are not ends in themselves. They should exist to serve values larger than themselves, human values. They should exist to serve the common good, to serve human health and well-being, to ensure the care and sustainability of our earth. There are important questions we need to ask. Does our economic system exist to serve families, or does our family structure exist to serve the economic structure? Why should both parents have to work out of the home? Why do we have so little interaction with family members, not even eating together in many cases? Are social structures arranged to bring generations together or to pull them apart? Do work structures exist to support parenting, the building of community, the work of citizen activists, or for the efficiency of the economic machine? This economic meltdown will help us begin to ask the right questions. And so will the peaking of fossil fuel, which is upon us. When oil is no longer cheap, and that time will come again, and soon, our economic life will shift dramatically. We will be more and more focused locally. We will eat more local food, trade with small businesses close at hand, find ways to work that are more amenable to family life instead of commuting miles each day. We will walk and bike and use transit instead of drive. We will not fly thousands of miles away from home to meetings or to vacation 3 or 4 times a year. We will live closer together, and we will share more of ourselves more of the time. We will mend instead of buying new. Some of us urban dwellers will weave and knit and plant and grow. Change is already happening, and more will come. This is one of those rare openings in which the scales have fallen from the national eyes, and it is clear to almost everyone that the emperor has no clothes. The good news is that we will now have the opportunity to reimagine the kind of economy we want, the kind of life we want to live. We need to take advantage of the moment to reimagine, to reform the American dream. It's not that people don't understand that we have a problem. It's that people have had their imaginations drained out of them by the constant barrage of messages they receive about consuming. And they have had their energies drained out by jobs that have longer and longer hours and less meaning. But the people need leadership. You know, I think of that old Christian blessing, a Chinese blessing, may you live in interesting times. Our generation has a mission, a clear and evident one. We have a compelling moral purpose which can direct our lives and our energies. Literally, we are about saving the world. So what is our part? The place to begin is at home, that is, with ourselves. Notice what is life-denying and resist it. Just say no for your sake and for your children's sake. Live with the moral authority that comes from compassion and nonviolence. Form communities of people who will sustain you in living as you wish to live, whether they are study groups or alternative living arrangements or socially responsible, sustainable businesses. Our churches should be central gathering places for such communities. Now we structure our lives to serve the economy. What would an economy look like that was structured to serve the people? How would you like to live? Make it happen. You and I belong to a group of people that Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson refers to as the cultural creatives, a growing segment of the U.S. population, already over 25, who embrace a new culture that values diversity, stewardship of the environment, economic justice, and civil rights for all. They say that roughly half the number combine those beliefs with some form of spiritual practice. They call these people the core cultural creatives. It is from these folks like you and me, folks that populate Unitarian Universalist churches, that the new story, the new cultural narrative will emerge. I'm not sure of the exact words you will choose or how you will put them together for your story, but some of those words might be love, service, kindness, joy, presence, peace, integrity, stewardship, covenant. These are religious concepts, and this is the beloved community that we are building. I was intrigued by these words of an East German dissident, Rudolf Barrow. He said, "When the forms of an old culture are dying, the new culture is created by a few people who are not afraid to be insecure." I started thinking about us as Unitarian Universalists. This is who we are. We are not afraid to be insecure. We are not afraid to search, to go deeper, to find the truth, even when the truth is unpalatable. We are seekers who want to live out of that truth, not some kind of made-up world that might be more monetarily comfortable to live in. Unitarian Universalists, though small in number, can be the yeast in the loaf. Let us, however, be wary of the usual distractions and follies of our movement. It's grown-up time now. We no longer have time for petty quarrels about how religious our language should be. No time for conflict between the humanists and the more spiritually inclined. No time for squabbles about who's in charge here. The mission of the church is not about meeting our needs. The mission of the church is about healing our world. It is about giving ourselves to something larger than ourselves. Ironically, when we give ourselves in this way, we find that our deepest needs will, in fact, be met. The idealism that caused John Wycliffe to say that we have a special destiny, and that destiny is to be as the city upon the hill, is not dead in this country. I see it in certain young people who are quietly living in a way respectful of our earth. I see it in many creative people who have a vision way beyond the popular mind. I know that wherever the human spirit is willing to join with that larger spirit, that new dreams can be dreamed and whole nations can be moved. Whoever thought the Berlin Wall would come crashing down? But when the time was right, it came down. Whoever thought that Nelson Mandela would get out of prison after 28 years and lead his nation? But in time it happened. I grew up in North Louisiana in the 1950s in a small, totally segregated town. I literally never saw a black man in a dress shirt. Who would have guessed that I would see an African-American president in my lifetime? An African-American president with a cabinet replete with women and people of color. The time is ripe for a great turning once again. I am convinced that what is life-denying, what is repressive and false, will be known as such, and people who are basically good will follow a new way. Let us be some of those who step out and lead, who dare to once again be the light that blesses the world.
Does anyone have any comments or feedback, questions?
Just a second, Susan, let me get you up here.
I just was giving a thumbs up to say, wow, really wow, and how wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
All right, just a second here. Okay, I'll get to Jill. All right, go ahead, Jill.
That is so hopeful, and I hope that she's right. But I'm just really very sad about the state of the world right now. I think it was one of my favorite quotes from John Kenneth Galbraith, and I'm paraphrasing, but that in our culture, we pay people in an inverse relationship to their value to society. When you think about right now, the essential workers are the ones who make minimum wage if they're lucky and don't get health insurance. And I guess my hope is pinned on that little 13-year-old in there who has more wisdom sometimes coming out of her mouth. And she says Gen Z is going to change the world. And boy, I hope she's right, because we sure aren't doing it right now, for all Marilyn Sewell's good words. David, when was that? What is the date of that sermon?
I don't think I have a date. No.
It's pretty recent.
Give a date.
During the Obama administration, obviously.
I believe it's recent, though, from certain things that she says, I believe it's recent.
It sounds recent, yeah, from the state of the world. Okay. No, well,
It was 2009.
oh, okay.
And what I found amazing about that sermon when I found it was, here we are again.
Not relevant.
Oh,
But it still gives us hope and gives us a path. But it was 2009.
Wow.
All right, 1 second. Let me get to Stephanie here. Go ahead.
I can't see you guys now. Okay, here we go. As I was listening, I was thinking about the people that I know who are trying to carve out a new life. I have several friends in Maine, for example, who have kind of gone off, not off the grid, but they've started living a life where they're raising most of their own food. They've built communities of people of like mind. They're selling local food and consuming local food. And I know there's some people down here doing that too. The other thing I'd like to say is that, just as a hopeful note, I know a lot of our students have chosen alternative kinds of lives and are working really hard on social justice. And when I see, people that maybe I taught 5 or 10 years ago, or for instance, my son, who came out of the College of the Atlantic, which is an entirely alternative universe, all those people are going out into the world and doing things that we would all really applaud. I think sometimes it depends on where you are, what you see. And one of the things I've found about being here in Texas is that the world that she describes of kind of getting and spending and, the mainstream kind of lives are really informed by the politics of this place. But not every place is like this. Yeah. And there may be more of what she describes in terms of that creative life going on than we see or that we're aware of. And I would say that even like our contractor here working on this house with us, they're very, I think they're pretty conservative, like they're Baptists. But they have chosen to live in a way like it's very intentional. Like they have a bunch of kids, they're raising their own food. They're like he stops work every day at 5 o'clock so he can go home and be with his wife and kids. And it's like you see these little beautiful little glimmers of people who are like, we're not following that old pattern if we can find a way to not do that. Anyway, so I was just thinking about all those people, my friend Crystal, and just a bunch of people that I was thinking of as David was reading about trying to create a different kind of economy. Anyway, so just to put in a little bit of a hopeful note, and then of course I've been really fascinated and thrilled by the numbers of people out protesting and the varieties of people who are protesting, the ages, the genders, the colors, all of it, all the diversity of it. And it feels to me like maybe we're at a tipping point again. Well, who knows?
Give me just a second here. Okay. I'm going to go top down on my screen. So let's start with Mari. And you'll have a thing asking you to unmute. Mari, you've got to hit the button that says unmute.
Okay,
There you go.
got it. My screen's breaking up a little bit. I hope you can hear me this time.
Yes.
I just want to, the sermon was just wonderful, but David, I'd also like to compliment you on the poem. It was absolutely beautiful and so perfectly apt and wonderful. I also would like to say that Reverend Sewell has a number of books in the UUA. If you go to the UUA site and go to the bookstore, she has a number of books, particularly poetry that I remember, and a list. So, and she's absolutely a wonderful writer. Also, another thing that's a resource, surprisingly, for those of you who just don't feel good about the Kerrville Daily Times, this last Saturday was a wonderful edition. It was full of the history and it had an insert which was all about the Declaration of Independence. A lot of information about when and how and who, created it. Very, very interesting issue. And in Kerrville, that gives me hope that comes out here, and it doesn't get badly interpreted. It just is. It's facts. It's history. And I loved it, and I recommend it to you. You can get it online, I think. Anyway, thank you, David, and thanks for everybody. Good to see you all.
All right, Vicki, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to Linda for finding that sermon, and to David, well read, and thank you again for the poem. Nothing like a little frost to start your day, right? I just wanted to share a little hopeful glimmer that I heard just the other day. I have a friend in San Antonio who is he's just an old transplanted New York hippie, and he has been a peace advocate for many, many years. And in several of the San Antonio demonstrations, he commented on the young age of the people who showed up. But more importantly, at least to me, he shared with me that there were dozens and dozens of 20-somethings who were doing voter registration. And the only voter registration, I mean, I have done it, but it's usually the League of Women Voters, right? They're not 20-year-olds. So I thought that was a really hopeful sign. And I think another sign of this turning point that we're at, I think there's some momentum growing, and that's one of the indicators for me anyway. So again, thank you both again to Linda and David.
Dr. Meredith, I'd like to say something too.
Okay. All right, and Meredith, you're up next. It should be us asking you to unmute your microphone there.
Thank you. One of the things, of course, that we have in this country, we're large and we're diverse, are all the cultures within it, all the subcultures, probably more than any country that I know of. And I so appreciated in the sermon her use of referring to cultures, her use of the concepts. We had, and also, of course, in the wonderful Frost's poem. It was a wonderful sermon. Thank you both again for finding and for reading that. It's something to think about all week long. I also want to mention the fact that the music that was played, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, was written by John Batiste, who is a genius composer, in my opinion. He started with the history, with the concepts of history about this piece, such as celebration and the looking at heroes. And then the rest of the piece was really different rhythms, different ideas. And what he was trying to deal with, of course, was the many, many cultures. And he felt that this music brought to people not only Black and white culture, but all the other cultures that we have within, and all the other times that we have within our country. I felt it was very moving and maybe kind of complicated quickly, too fast, but I loved it. And one other thing, I'm sure that we have all done this, but I just want to thank Justin again. I don't know how I'd be able to handle the things here with this without him, and knowing that he's there is the biggest thing. So I thank you, Justin, and I am so happy that you're doing well with your health. Yes.
All right, Amanda wanted to say something. So.
Hi, I wanted to piggyback on a little bit what Vicki was saying, because I am so overwhelmingly proud of the generation that is, you know, I'm in my 30s, you know, the younger ones who are out there, and man, they are just kicking some hiney, and I support them so thoroughly, and I'm so proud of them. And, you know, Mark is even bringing up to me, you know, why is this going on? So I'm having to explain, like, you know, 300 years of racism. And he's like, what is wrong with people? And I'm like, honey, I don't know. But you know what? We can change. We can change the world. And the fact that there are parents like us around, and if we were lucky, we weren't that lucky, but we don't have parents like y'all, you know, who were just awesome, you know, and supportive. You don't box people up. We don't box people up into certain labels.
Yeah.
And so I forgot where I was going with that, but I'm just so proud of these kids. I really am. And I support them and I love them. And oh, yes, revolution. Let's make a change.
Anybody else want to chime in on anything here? And okay, Pat, are you trying to get my attention? Give me just a second here.
Okay, I just wanted to, you know, some of you on Facebook know that I was very excited about finally being able to access this wonderful gift of being able to see this very expensive Broadway musical, Hamilton. But when I viewed it the second time, the first time I had internet problems and watched it all, but with so many interruptions, it wasn't very good. And when I watched it again yesterday, what it did for me was remind me that, okay, our government is in chaos right now. I mean, the world is a tough place. But the very founding fathers, I mean, for heaven's sakes, Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. I mean, it was a political fight. It was an ideological fight. This chaos has existed many times before when you look at history. And I liked it that wonderful musical. I don't even like hip hop, but I got to tell you, I really got into it when I watched it yesterday. And because I don't think it's on very long, I just might watch it again. You see the meaning of it and why it was written when you watch it all the way through. And hey, avail yourselves of this gift. It only costs the cost of paying a $6.99 subscription to the Disney Channel. You have to get onto Disney in order to view it, but you only have to pay for 1 month. I'm going to get out of Disney after a month. In the meantime, I'm going to watch all the old shows like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that I saw when I was a little kid. But Hamilton is worth looking at for the perspective it gives us. I'm done. It's so good to see all of you.
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly, there's a very good article, a critique on Hamilton on Vox.com that talks about how so many people love or hate, and a lot are conflicted in both because of the imagery and the way the founding fathers are portrayed. But in fact, there's controversy in how they really behaved and what their values were in the time, but they were products of their time. And there's a quote in there from a Unitarian University minister from the seminary in Chicago that I thought was interesting. So if that sounds of interest to you, Vox.com, and it should be up there in their recent articles that were published in the last week.
All right, anybody else?
Brian will extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Justin, if you'll unmute everybody for a little more social time.
Absolutely. Give me just 1 second here. I'm stopping the recording first.